This is Velvet Hour, slow bedtime stories to help you drift off and sleep through the night. Tonight's story, Foggy Lighthouse Keeper's Cottage. Cottage is already awake when you reach it. The door is shut against the fog, and the little square window holds a thin amber light. Above everything, far above the roof and the rock and the low pale sea, the lamp makes its patient turn. Its brightness does not hurry. It comes and goes through the mist like a thought remembered, then let go. Near the step, a small brass key hangs from a peg just inside the doorway, and now and then, when the wood settles, it gives one tiny, clear note against the wall. You pause beneath the lintel for a moment and listen before entering. The night is made of quiet things laid close together. There is the sea, but it is only a hush, as if a broad gray sleeve were being drawn slowly across stone. There is the faintest draft in the eaves and the slow, dry breathing of the driftwood fire within. Then there is that little sound again, the key touching wood with a neat and modest click. It is not loud enough to call attention to itself, yet once you have heard it, it remains somewhere near the center of the room. When the door opens, the cottage gives back its own stored warmth. It is not a heavy warmth. It has the modest comfort of a place kept well by steady hands and simple habits. The fire in the grate is low, more ember than flame, and one narrow piece of driftwood glows at the edge with a white seam of salt. The room smells faintly of smoke, old wool, damp rope, and the clean mineral breath that rides in with the fog. The table stands near the hearth with a logbook open upon it, its pages spread as though the keeper has only just stepped away. Nothing in the room asks to be admired. Each thing simply has its place and keeps it. A chair with smooth arms stands by the table. A shelf of crockery holds a bowl, a blue-rimmed plate, a stout mug, and a small tin of matches. The brass key by the door catches the firelight on one edge and remains dull on the other, a practical thing, worn bright by fingers at the bow and dark in the grooves. When the latch falls closed behind you, the key answers with that tiny chime, and then the cottage becomes quiet again around it. You move farther in, and the floorboards speak in low, familiar tones. They do not creak sharply. They murmur, as if the house were considering your steps and finding them acceptable. The open logbook waits under the lamp on the table, and the pen has been left across the gutter where two pages meet. One page carries neat entries in dark ink, each line calm and measured, with times, weather, direction of wind, and the brief notes of a life spent watching. The page beneath your hand has room still to spare, and the paper is faintly ridged, pleasant to the touch in the warm pool of light. By the door lies the coil of rope, thick and orderly, like a sleeping thing that has never once forgotten its work. The fibers are pale where they have dried near the fire, darker at the inner turns, where sea damp lingers longer. A little scent of brine rises from it, not fresh and sharp, but softened by use and time. The rope rests beside a pair of boots with salt at the seams and a hook for a lantern hung above them. Just above the rope, the key hangs where it has likely hung for years, and once more it makes its delicate tick against the wood, a simple, bright point in the room's blanket of softer sounds. The lamp above the lighthouse completes another slow sweep, and its passing changes the cottage without disturbing it. For a breath or two, the window whitens, the panes catching a pale, moving arc. The glaze of the jug on the shelf glints. The brass key shines fully, then fades back to its humbler glow. Even the logbook seems to brighten at the edges of the pages before returning to the steadier amber of the lamp on the table. The whole room receives the light as a shore receives a long, low wave with no surprise in it at all. You set a hand on the back of the chair and stand quietly, letting the place arrive around you. The fire gives a faint, soft, settling noise, like paper folding in another room. Somewhere overhead, through thick stone and iron and the turning mechanism of the lamp, there is a low, continuous hum so far above that it seems less a sound than a line held in the air. From outside comes the blurred call of water lifting and easing back among rocks hidden under fog. Then the key taps lightly once again, as if to mark the end of one silence and the beginning of the next. The cottage is small, but tonight its quiet feels layered and deep. At the window, the night presses close in a pale gray sheet. The glass is cool, and the fog beyond it has erased all but the nearest shapes. Now and then the dark suggestion of the path appears, then vanishes. A gate might be there, or only a post, or the top of low grass bent with moisture. The sea itself can only be guessed by the way the gray becomes a little wider and a little more open beyond the line of rocks. Then the lamp turns again, and for an instant the mist glows from above, soft as breath on a mirror. It seems right to begin nowhere grander than here, inside this modest room, while the night arranges itself around the walls. No task presses. No hour needs to be counted. There is only the open book, the slow fire, the far revolving light, and the brass key with its tiny, clear voice. The keeper's cottage holds these things the way a pocket holds a few useful objects, each one worn smooth by repetition and weather. You remain near the table, listening while the quiet settles into its many small parts. The chair draws back with a low wooden sigh, and you sit at the table beside the logbook. The lamplight is enough to read by comfortably, though it leaves the corners of the room in a dim gold-brown hush. The ink entries are spare, and even, written by someone who trusts a simple line to say enough. Fog low over eastern water. Fire banked at dusk. Bell buoy faint to the south. Lantern glass cleaned. There is a steadiness in these notes that reaches beyond the page, as if each sentence were another small stone laid in a wall that has stood a long time against weather. You read slowly, not for information alone, but for the shape of the evenings they suggest. A page from autumn mentions migrating geese passing somewhere hidden above the cloud, heard before they were gone. Another records frost whitening the inside edge of the window by dawn. One line from a night much like this says only, "Sea quiet as folded cloth." That phrase seems to remain in the room after the page is turned, joining the driftwood smoke and the distant mechanism's hum. Behind you, by the door, the brass key answers with its tiny touch on wood, a small bright punctuation in the middle of so much softness. The pen on the page has a wooden handle darkened where fingers have rested over many seasons. Its nib is clean and faintly shining. Beside the logbook stands a small blotter, its surface stained into old clouded blooms of blue, black, and brown. Nothing is arranged for display. Even the lamp on the table, with its simple shade and modest brass stem, wears a practical dullness except where the hand has polished a few narrow places by habit. This room seems to prefer use to ornament, and because of that, every object feels complete. You lean to listen, and the cottage offers its quiet in layers. The fire gives a hush and a shy crackle that never rises into brightness. The kettle on the hob is not boiling, yet metal answers heat with tiny inward shifts, as if the sides were dreaming themselves warmer. The rope by the door keeps its own silence, but now and then one outer fiber loosens and settles with a whisper against the floor. Above all of these comes the distant revolving life of the lamp, a vibration so even that it makes the room feel held in place. Then, after a pause long enough to notice, the key ticks against the wall once and is still. At the far side of the table lies a ruler, a folded square of cloth, and a pair of spectacles with round lenses. The spectacles are folded neatly atop a weather report several days old. The cloth smells very slightly of oil and polish. A corner of the report has curled, and when the lamp's warmth reaches it, the paper rises almost imperceptibly, then lies flat again. So much of this room is made of such small motions. The beauty of it is not in surprise, but in the certainty that every faint sound will arrive in its own patient time. You turn another page and find a pressed feather laid between the entries, gray at the shaft and lighter toward the edge. It has flattened over time, keeping only the suggestion of its former curve. Perhaps it came from a gull after a windy morning, or from some quieter bird sheltering in the lee of the stone wall. The feather has no note attached to it. It asks for no explanation. It rests there because one evening someone set it down and then allowed the book to remember it. When you close the book halfway and rest your hand on the cover, the cottage seems to listen back. The room is not empty, though no one else is present. It is full of traces so mild they never crowd one another. The edge of the chair arm polished by sleeves, the faint ring on the table where a mug once stood and stood again, the place by the door where the paint has worn thinnest near the peg that holds the key. The key gives its tiny note once more, and because the room is so calm, that modest sound seems almost companionable. You rise and cross to the hearth. The driftwood is shaped by years in the sea before the fire ever touched it. One piece is smooth as bone, another twisted into a curve like a sleeping hand. Salt held deep in the grain burns slowly, lending the flame a quiet blue seam now and then at the edge of orange. The smoke is mild and dry. It carries no heaviness. It drifts up with a slight resinous sweetness from some long-ago tree, followed by the faint mineral tang of the shore. On the mantel stands a clock that does not try to own the room. Its tick is soft and partly muffled by the fire, yet once noticed, it falls gently into step with the larger rhythm of the night. Beside it is a small framed chart of the local headland, the lines hand-drawn and carefully labeled. The glass has gathered a veil of fine salt that softens the details. There is also a smooth white stone, oval and ordinary, placed there for reasons no one felt obliged to write down. In a room like this, ordinary things are allowed to remain ordinary and still be loved. The window above the sink has fogged at the corners. A thin bead of moisture gathers where the pane meets the frame and does not yet fall. Outside is only luminous gray, but each time the lamp turns, the cottage receives the briefest change in tone, as though another room had opened for a moment beyond the wall. The basin is enamel, chipped at the rim. A plate leans to dry. A spoon rests in a cup and faintly touches the side when a draft passes under the door. Then the key answers once with its own finer and clearer tap. You open the cupboard and find its quiet order pleasing. A crock of oats stands beside a bag of tea. There is a heel of bread wrapped in cloth, a jar of preserves dark as garnet, and a tin with 3 biscuits stacked neatly inside. A packet of candles lies behind the flour. The shelves smell of wood, starch, and a little salt that no wiping quite removes from a house so near the sea. When you close the door, the latch makes only a muted kiss of sound, quickly absorbed by the room. Near the back wall, a narrow staircase climbs to the upper floor where the keeper might sleep between rounds. The stair treads are shallow and worn smooth in the middle. You place a hand on the rail and begin to go up, slowly enough to hear each board answer. None complains. Each step has learned long ago how to speak softly under steady feet. Halfway up, the turning lamp sends a moving bar of pale light through the stairwell slit, and for a moment the wall glows like stone underwater. Then it passes, and the amber from below returns. At the top of the stairs, the room under the eaves is spare and neat. A bed with a wool blanket sits beneath the small dormer window. A washstand holds a basin and folded cloth. There is a peg for a coat, and beside it a shelf with 2 books lying flat, a candle stub, and a shell used perhaps as a dish for collar studs or loose buttons. The shell is smooth inside, rougher at the lip, and catches a pale gleam each time the distant lamp turns. Here too the cottage is full of quiet surfaces that seem to remember hands without insisting on story. The bed is made with the kind of care that takes little time because it has been done the same way each morning for years. The blanket is rougher than it first appears, thick and honest, with a warmth that comes not from softness alone, but from weight. When you sit on the edge for a moment, the mattress yields with a low, inward sigh. Through the dormer, the fog presses close enough to erase the horizon entirely. Yet the sweep of the light still enters on its cycle, whitening the mist outside the glass and then dimming. Even up here, a little delayed and thinned by floorboards, you hear the key below touch the wall. A coat hangs from the peg, long and weather dark, smelling faintly of wet wool and sea air dried near the fire. In one pocket there is a folded handkerchief and a smooth pebble. In another, a stub of pencil and a bit of string. These modest remains of ordinary days seem fitting here, where usefulness is a kind of grace. The books on the shelf are a tied almanac and a volume of poems with a cracked spine. You open the poems at random and find a page corner turned down, then close it again without reading more than a line. Tonight, the house itself seems enough to listen to. Back downstairs, the room has changed only by degrees. That is one of its gentlest qualities. It does not ask you to keep up with anything. The fire has settled lower, a rib of red along the log and a little fan of ash beneath it. The kettle has become warmer, and now an occasional soft tick travels around its metal skin. The clock continues its discreet accounting. And by the door, after a pause long enough to let the ear wander elsewhere, the key gives another tiny bright note. You place another small piece of driftwood onto the fire. It catches not all at once, but slowly, taking the ember's warmth and beginning along one edge. This new flame does not leap. It gathers itself like a folded ribbon being opened. The room answers with a modest lift in light, just enough to bring out the grain in the table and the braided texture of the rope by the door. The brass key gleams more warmly for a few breaths, then returns to its quieter tone. Even this slight brightening seems to move through the cottage as gently as the sweep from the lamp above. The logbook invites a new entry, and though no duty calls for it, it feels natural to sit again and add a line to the waiting page. The pen scratches softly as it moves. That sound belongs in this house. It seems as modest and exact as the keeper's earlier notes. Perhaps the entry says only that the fog is calm and low, that the sea is hushed, that the lamp continues its faithful turning over a coast almost hidden from sight. Perhaps it notes the driftwood fire, nearly spent and then renewed. Perhaps it does not mention the brass key at all, because some small sounds are too woven into a place to seem remarkable to those who live beside them. You lay the pen down and watch the ink darken into the paper. The letters lose their wet shine and become part of the page. On the next leaf, the book is still blank, an expanse of quiet waiting. Blank paper and lamplight has a presence of its own. It is not emptiness. It is room held in reserve. The keeper's cottage seems full of such reserves: folded blankets, stacked bowls, extra wick, a second candle, another log, another page, another turn of the lamp. Now the room's small sounds begin to reveal their order more clearly. First comes the distant sea, less a wave than a breathing at the foot of stone. Then the upper hum of the lamp mechanism, so steady it could almost be mistaken for silence if it were not so faithful. Then the fire settling softly in the grate. Then the clock. Then the occasional answering sounds of wood and kettle and spoon. And among them, never regular enough to become a tick like the clock, never random enough to vanish, the brass key touching the wall with one neat, clear note, as though reminding the room of itself. The fog outside thickens and thins by small degrees. Sometimes the window shows only a blank, pale surface, milky and close. Then a shape emerges, perhaps the outline of the stone wall or the darker vertical of the lantern post near the path. On one sweep of the lamp, tiny droplets on the glass shine and become a field of silver points. On the next, they fade. There is nothing dramatic in this. The pleasure is in watching almost nothing change, and in noticing that almost nothing can still be full of detail. You find a wool throw folded at the back of the chair and drape it over the arm. The fabric is brushed soft by use, but keeps a faint smell of cedar from the chest where it is stored in warmer months. When shaken once, it releases a breath of dust so fine that it is seen only when the lamp turns and crosses the air. Then it settles. The chair receives the throw with a dull hush of fabric against wood. Across the room, the rope remains in its patient coil, and the key gives a small answering click as if acknowledging the movement. Near the hearth is a little box of kindling, and beside it a shallow pan where shells and pebbles have been gathered from the shore. None is rare. One shell is chipped to a crescent. One pebble is striped with thin white lines like foam drawn in stone. There is a piece of sea glass green as old bottlenecks, its edges worn smooth by years of turning water. These things seem less like a collection than a habit of noticing. The keeper must have returned with them in a pocket, one at a time, on mornings or evenings when the tide left something worth carrying home. You hold the green glass to the light. It glows for a second, sea-colored and humble. Then you set it back among the others. The lamp overhead turns again, and the house receives its brief wash of paler brightness. It arrives through window and crack, through the stairwell slit and under the eave, touching crockery, chart glass, kettle lid, and the bow of the brass key. The key, warmed by the room and the fire, looks almost liquid in that passing beam. When the brightness moves on, the key gives its familiar tap, and the amber stillness closes around it once more. At some point, a gull passes in the fog. It is heard only as a low, softened cry, immediately taken by distance and mist until it becomes less a call than a thread drawn across the night. The cottage does not react. The clock keeps on. The fire folds inward. The lamp turns. It is the sort of sound that enters a place already full of quieter sounds and becomes one of them. When it is gone, the absence it leaves is gentle, not empty. You stand at the door and place your hand lightly on the latch without opening it yet. Through the wood comes the night air's cool pressure and the faint scent of wet stone. The rope at your feet carries its own deeper brine smell, a little tar, a little hemp, and the memory of tidewater dried many times over. The key hangs just above your knuckles, its worn bow smooth and slightly chill. You touch it and it swings, almost imperceptibly, giving a small, clear note against the wall that seems to shine longer than the movement itself. Then everything is still again. When the door opens, the fog waits close, as if it had been listening at the threshold. The path outside is dark with moisture. Each stone in it has taken on a deeper color. The grass on either side leans under tiny beads of water. Sound changes at once in the open air. The fire falls farther back. The clock disappears. The sea grows broader, though still hushed. And above, the revolving lamp sends its pale attention over the fog in slow, returning intervals, each pass whitening the path for a few breaths before it dims again. You do not go far at first. The cottage behind you holds its amber square at the window, and that is enough. The air tastes faintly of salt and iron from the rail near the path. Somewhere water touches rock with such mild regularity that it seems to be speaking from another room. The tower rises beyond the cottage as a darker column inside the mist, its upper lantern hidden except when the sweep comes and traces a glow through the fog. The whole headland feels wrapped, not concealed but softened, as if every hard edge had been given a quiet covering for the night. The path to the tower is bordered by low stones furred in damp lichen. Your steps on the gravel are small, careful sounds. They do not travel far. In fog, even footsteps seem to prefer staying close. At the tower door, the iron strap hinges hold beads of moisture that flash and vanish with each passing sweep from above. The stone wall is cool under your palm. It smells of lime, wetness, and a little faint oil carried down from the lamp room through the spine of the building. Behind you, from the cottage, there comes the memory of the brass key's tiny note, though the sound itself does not reach this far. Inside the tower, the air changes again. It is close, stone-held, with a mild tang of metal and lamp oil, and beneath that, the old mineral smell of the circular walls. The stairs rise around the center in patient repetition. As you climb, your hand slides along the rail polished by years of use. The sound here is contained and rounded. Each step offers a soft answer and then lets it fade upward. Higher still, the mechanism's hum grows more present, no longer just a line held in distant air, but a living, steady tone around which the whole tower seems arranged. At the service landing, a small bench holds tools wrapped in cloth. A wrench, a tin of oil, a stack of folded rags. A notebook lies shut beneath a paperweight made from a stone. The window slit here is narrow as a held breath, and through it the fog glows and darkens with the lamp's turn. One can imagine the keeper pausing at this landing each evening, not from weariness, but because some places invite a brief standstill. The tower has that quality. It asks not to be conquered, only to be accompanied upward at its own measured pace. In the lantern room, glass and brass and moving light make a world of their own, yet even here there is no drama. The great lens does not blaze so much as gather and release brightness in solemn rhythm. The machinery hums with a consistency that feels almost tender, as if it knows the importance of not startling the night. Metal teeth mesh. A belt turns. Somewhere a small component gives a soft, repeated brushing sound, like cloth drawn steadily through a ring. Beyond the glass, the sea and fog receive each slow passing beam and return nothing but a larger whiteness. From this height, the cottage is a dim shape below, roof dark with damp, one window lit. The path between it and the tower appears for a moment under the sweep, then disappears. The rocks by the water are hidden except where the lamp reveals their wet backs in passing silver. Far out, no vessel shows, and no answering light. It is simply a coast in its own company. The beam turns, the machinery hums, and the fog receives everything without comment. A padded stool stands near the mechanism, its leather seat cracked in a star where many evenings have rested. Beside it is a cloth used for the glass, folded with habitual care. On a hook hangs the jacket worn for these rounds, a little lighter than the coat in the cottage, smelling more strongly of oil. Here, the sounds have a cleaner edge, but they remain gentle. There is no suddenness in any of them. Even the moving gears seem cushioned by long familiarity. It is easy to imagine sitting here through whole nights, listening not for change, but for steadiness maintained. When the lamp completes each turn, its body gives the slightest shift, not a stop, not even a catch, only a minute alteration in pressure that can be heard if you stand quietly enough. It is a small mechanical breath, followed by the continuing hum. That breath has likely sounded for years in one form or another, through many keepers, many fogs, many calm and crowded waters. A house sound, a tower sound, a headland sound. Like the key in the cottage, it is too modest to command the room, yet without it, the place would feel unmoored from itself. You remain a while, watching the beam move over blankness and stone. The glass panes gather tiny drops on their outer faces, and each droplet catches a thread of brightness for one instant before darkness returns. The railing around the lantern room is cool and slightly tacky with condensed moisture. Down below, When the sweep reaches the cottage, the window shines and then subsides. It is comforting to know that the table, the open logbook, the low driftwood fire, the coil of rope, and the brass key are all waiting in the same arrangement as before, held in the slower amber world beneath this revolving crown. The descent is even quieter than the climb. Sound falls with you and softens at each turn of the stair. By the time you reach the tower door again, the hum has retreated into the higher stone and become the distant line it was before. Outside, the fog has deepened slightly, enough that the cottage seems nearer because little else remains visible. The path glistens. A bead of water slips from the top of the railing and lands with a sound too small to name. Then the lamp passes once more, making every damp surface briefly aware of itself. Back at the cottage threshold, the latch lifts gently. Warmth meets the cool air in a quiet exchange. The smell of driftwood smoke returns, and with it the room's close wooden notes and the faint wool scent from the throw over the chair. You step in and close the door, carefully. The latch settles. A board shifts underfoot, and almost at once, as if greeting your return, the brass key touches the wall with its light, clear click. The room seems complete again with that sound inside it. A little more of the kettle's heat has awakened now. Not a boil, not a steam, only the first murmuring promise along the lid and handle. You fill the mug and set a spoon of tea leaves into the pot, then wait while the water finds its way. The sound is soft and pleasing, a narrow pour into ceramic, a faint rise of steam, the gentle touching of lid against pot. Fragrance lifts with it, simple and dark. In such a room, even making tea feels less like an event than like another note added to an old and familiar chord. While the tea draws, you stand at the window. The glass has cleared a little at the center from the room's warmth. Through that small, clear oval, you can see the nearest rocks and the edge of the path. The fog moves so slowly that only the lamp's sweep reveals it. When the light passes, the mist brightens in thin layers, nearest and farthest, each one almost separate from the next. Then the window becomes plain gray again. Behind you, the key sounds once, and the note hovers in the air just long enough to be folded into the faint clink of cup against saucer. The tea is strong and modestly bitter, just right for a night built out of quiet. The mug warms the hand without demanding to be held. You carry it to the chair by the fire and sit, the throw now over the arm within easy reach. From here, the room arranges itself in a companionable half-circle. Table, book, lamp, hearth, rope, door, key. Even the staircase rising into dimness seems less like a route and more like another kept object, a vertical shelf of worn wood waiting for morning or for another round. The cottage has a way of turning usefulness into calm. Time goes on in this room not by hours alone, but by softenings. The log on the fire rounds inward and drops a small fan of ash. The tea cools enough to drink more slowly. The fog at the window beads and clears, beads and clears. The lamp's revolving brightness continues to brush the wall in steady intervals. The key gives its little note, then is quiet, then sounds again after enough silence has passed to make it newly welcome. It is a small thing, that key, but tonight it seems to gather the room's stillness into one bright point whenever it speaks. The open logbook remains where you left it. Occasionally, your eyes move to the fresh entry drying there, Beside it, the blotter waits, though there is no need to use it. A corner of one earlier page has lifted slightly from the rest, perhaps from old damp, and now the moving air in the room lets it tremble now and then without turning. Paper has its own private language. So do coals, so does brass, so does rope. In the cottage, nothing is ever truly silent. Quiet here is made of many patient sounds resting close together. A shelf above the hearth holds jars of things gathered and saved, nails sorted by size in one, buttons in another, a little heap of matchbox labels pressed flat inside a third. One jar contains wicks trimmed and ready. Another holds sea-polished corks that must once have traveled far before reaching this shore. Their usefulness may be gone, yet they remain. The keeper seems to have understood that a place grows restful not by emptying itself of small things, but by letting each one have a settled home. Even the brass key, plain as it is, belongs not just on a peg, but in the sounding life of the room. At one point, the fire leans low enough that the room darkens by a gentle shade. This changes the balance of sounds. The clock comes forward. The kettle's metal speech becomes easier to hear. The wind, though barely present, brushes the far side of the cottage and makes one corner of the roof give a tiny, dry murmur. Then the lamp sweeps, and the room pales at the edges before the amber fills in again. No single sound remains in command for long. Each arrives, glows softly, and subsides. You rise to bank the fire a little, drawing the embers together with the small iron tool by the grate. Ash whispers. One charred piece settles and reveals a brighter red beneath. A narrow lick of flame returns and rests along the new edge you have made. That is enough. The room brightens a little, and the brass key by the door answers with one crisp touch against the wall as if approving the arrangement. There is pleasure in such modest correspondences, though they ask for no interpretation. Beyond the door, the sea continues its broad gray hush. It never grows louder than the room. Instead, it seems to breathe in the spaces between the cottage's own sounds, filling the pauses with a far, level softness. Once or twice there is a distant bell buoy, so faint it might almost be imagined. It reaches through fog as a dull, rounded tone, then another with a long sleep between them. The logbook's earlier line returns to mind. Bellbuoy faint to the south. Here it is again, continuing its old work beyond sight. You fetch a second candle from the cupboard and set it on the table, though the lamp already gives enough light. Its flame is smaller, less steady, and more intimate, and in its company the room's shadows seem to draw nearer rather than deepen. The candlelight finds the grain in the wood and the worn ring on the table and the curved lip of the mug. The brass key takes both lights at once now, warm amber from the lamp and the softer tremor from the candle. For a moment it looks almost ceremonial, though it remains exactly what it is, a key waiting by a door, sometimes sounding against wood. The poems upstairs return to mind, and after a while you go to bring the volume down. The staircase knows you now and speaks in the same subdued voices as before. In the chair by the fire, you open the book and read a few lines here and there, never long enough to leave the room behind. The pages have softened at the corners. One leaf bears a faint brown mark where tea once reached it. A pressed clover falls out and lands on the blanket folded nearby with barely any sound at all. You tuck it back and continue, more for the rhythm of language than for any single meaning. Reading aloud in such a room would be easy, yet tonight silence seems more fitting than voice. The written words move quietly in the mind, while the cottage continues its own patient speech around them. The lamp above turns. The fog receives. The sea hushes. The key taps once. The effect is not of separate elements, but of one woven fabric, each thread distinct if noticed, whole if not. To sit inside that weaving is enough. Later, the candle burns lower and forms a small, clear pool around its wick. The tea is gone. The mug stands empty except for one leaf caught near the rim. The logbook's page has fully dried. A thin crescent of moon might exist above the fog, but if so, it leaves no mark the eye can find. The lighthouse lamp remains the only great moving brightness, and even it is perceived mostly by its effects. The shifting pallor at the window, the brief shine on the key, the passing silver along the spoon. This is a night made less of seen objects than of heard and half-heard continuities. At intervals, the cottage seems to settle deeper into the rock beneath it. A joist gives a low inward note. The shelf cups a subtle response. Somewhere under the floor, a trapped grain of sand shifts against wood. These are old house sounds, but gentler here, as if the damp air and long practice had taught every board to speak in undertones. The brass key remains the clearest among them, not because it is louder, but because brass carries a brightness wood cannot. One tiny click, and the ear finds the doorway without needing to look. The coil of rope by the door begins to interest you in the same unhurried way the key did earlier. You kneel and touch the outer turn. The fibers are rough, but not harsh, softened by weather and palms. Here and there, the tarred strands still hold a darker firmness. Near the center of the coil, a little moisture remains, cool against the skin. If brought close, it smells of seaweed faintly dried, of hemp, of work done in wet weather. Beside it, the boots wait with laces loosened, tongues folded down, their silence as complete as sleep. There is a relation between the rope and the key, between the tower and the logbook, between the fire and the fog. Each belongs to the ordinary keeping of a place exposed to weather, yet never dramatic in its duties. The keeper's life here must be full of repeated motions, checking oil, trimming wick, noting fog, mending line, banking fire, opening and closing the same door. Repetition in such a cottage does not seem dull. It seems polished. The room itself has been shaped by it into calm. You think of the key not merely as an object, but as one small witness among all the others. It has hung through seasons of rain and clear frost, through summer evenings when the air was easier, through winter nights when the tower windows held ice at the corners. Fingers have reached for it in darkness without missing. It has turned in locks, warmed in pockets, and returned to the peg. Tonight, though, it rests. Its task is only to wait and sound now and then, lending the cottage that crisp little note which makes the deeper hush around it feel even deeper. From the tower comes the sense, more than the sound, of the lamp's ongoing labor above the fog. It is strange and lovely how a distant mechanism can make a whole place feel attentive. Even when hidden, the turning is known by the room's recurring changes. The glass brightens. The candle flame bows slightly in the draft of altered temperature. The brass key flashes and dims. In this way, the tower keeps company with the cottage without needing to be seen. They converse through light and faint hum, and the night listens. A little later, you open the door just enough to hear the outer world more clearly. Cold enters in a narrow, clean ribbon. The sea is still hushed. The buoy is gone or too far off to carry. Instead, there is the soft drip from the eave to the step, one bead at a time, each landing on damp wood with a sound like fingertips on paper. The path beyond is only a pale suggestion. The lamp sweeps and the fog momentarily becomes a lit wall. You close the door gently, and the brass key, stirred by the movement, gives a slightly brighter click than before. That slightly brighter note lingers in memory long after it fades. It becomes easy to wait for the next one, but the room never lets waiting turn sharp. There is too much else quietly present. The fire offers a small release of resin from some hidden pocket in the driftwood. The clock continues. A tiny thread on the edge of the throw catches against the chair arm when you smooth it. The candle lowers. The kettle cools enough to make a different sort of metal sound, softer and less frequent than before. The cottage lets anticipation dissolve into noticing. An old saucer on the shelf holds a few coins darkened by salt air. Their stamped faces are nearly worn smooth. Beside them is a button carved from horn and a fishhook bent beyond use. Such things might once have gone into a drawer elsewhere. Here they remain visible and untroubled by being ordinary. The room does not hide its little remnants. It includes them just as it includes the key and its occasional sound in the full account of what this life by the lamp consists of. Nothing is too slight to belong. At some hour impossible to name exactly, the fog thins for a little while. The change is first heard rather than seen. The sea opens by 1 degree, its breadth spreading wider. Then the window begins to show a darker band where water lies beyond the rocks. The lamp's sweep reaches farther into the night, and from the chair you can glimpse the beam's path as a pale, moving thickness in the air. It is not enough to reveal distance, only enough to suggest it. The cottage remains the true center, with the brass key by the door still offering the smallest and clearest local sign that the world is continuing. You take the volume of poems back upstairs and pause halfway, on the stair, to listen down into the room. From that middle place, sounds sort themselves differently. The clock is clearer. The fire and the kettle merge. The sea falls away. The lamp hum is stronger again through the stone. The key sounds once, and because it comes from below and behind, it seems farther and brighter both at once. Such shifts in hearing are part of the night's slow variety. Nothing changes much, yet perspective itself keeps the quiet alive. On the upper floor, the bed waits unchanged under the wool blanket. The dormer window has collected a rim of moisture. A single drop tracks slowly down the pane and leaves a clearer line through the misted glass. Outside, the lamp's passing turns that line silver and then returns it to gray. The coat on the peg remains still. The shell on the shelf catches one little bead of light. Through the boards, underfoot, comes the softened life of the room below, including, after a little pause, the familiar tiny note of the key. You open the Tide Almanac and glance at a few pages. Numbers, columns, phases, times. They are practical facts, but in this setting, even tables of tide seem companionable. They speak of return and recession, of regularity under change. The keeper must have read these by this same kind of light, while the same quiet sounds moved around the room. You close the book and set it down carefully. Paper on wood makes a murmur hardly louder than breath. The cottage appears to prefer all things done this way, with no more sound than necessary. Downstairs again, you choose one of the 3 biscuits from the tin. It is plain, crisp, faintly sweet. The tin lid closes with a muted ring. Crumbs are brushed into the palm and then into the fire, where they vanish without comment. The mug is rinsed, the spoon dried, and each little domestic sound settles quickly back into the room. Washing a single cup at this hour in such a place has the same unhurried dignity as tending the lamp above. Both are forms of keeping. The candle reaches its end and gutters once, quietly, before recovering. Then it becomes a short, clear flame close to the wax. When at last you pinch it out, a thin thread of smoke rises and curls in the lamplight like dark ribbon. The room immediately grows larger in shadow and simpler in tone. One light remains on the table, another far overhead. Between them lie all the gradations of night this cottage knows. The brass key, now lit only by the steadier lamp and the passing sweep from above, returns to its plain and modest brightness. You begin to understand that the peace of this place comes not from silence, but from trust in recurring sounds. The sea will continue its low conversation with the rocks. The lamp will turn. The clock will mark. The wood will settle as it must. The key will answer now and then from the door. Because none of these sounds demands alarm or decision, they make a field in which thought can loosen and drift. The cottage does not empty the mind. It gives it gentle company until it no longer wishes to wander far. Another entry might be added to the logbook before the night is over, but it can wait. The blank page after the fresh note remains available, pale and patient. There is comfort in not filling everything at once. The keeper's hand, or yours, may return to it near dawn. For now, the open book simply keeps the table from seeming bare. It lies there as the rope lies by the door, as the key hangs on the peg, not asking to be completed, only ready. The fog closes in again. This time the sea recedes into near silence, and the cottage becomes more self-contained than ever. Sound no longer travels outward. It gathers within the walls. The spoon in the cup is very faintly touched by some minute shift of air. The clock is almost tender in its regularity. Ash settles with a soft inward sigh. The brass key gives a bright click, and then another much later, each one clean enough to seem almost visible. Outside, the lamp still turns, but it reaches the room mostly as brief changes in density rather than brightness. It is possible to sit for a long time with no wish to move. The chair holds its shape. The throw is drawn over the knees. The mug stands empty but companionable on the table. The low driftwood fire gives just enough heat to keep the room in balance. Nothing asks to be improved. Even the fading embers seem right as they are, each red vein deep in ash carrying its last calm work forward. The cottage has an art of enoughness, and the night outside approves. You notice the tiny marks time has left on nearly every surface. A knife line on the table where bread was cut. A dark thumbprint polished into the lamp stem. The notch in the stair rail where a ring once caught, perhaps many times over many years. A faint greening in one groove of the brass key where sea air has worked its patient chemistry. These are not signs of neglect. They are signs that things have remained long enough to become themselves fully. The keeper's cottage is rich in duration. When you go once more to the door, you do not open it. You simply stand near the peg and listen at close range to the quiet around the key. The metal holds a little room warmth now. The wall behind it smells faintly of paint and salt. From this nearness, the key's next movement is easier to catch. A slight sway first, almost felt before heard, and then the tiny contact, clear and precise. That is all. Yet in that small sound, there is the whole cottage. The settling wood, the sealed out fog, the recurring lamp, the modest life of a threshold between weather and shelter. The upstairs bed begins to seem inviting not because of weariness in any urgent sense, but because the night has reached that stage where stillness naturally prefers a softer resting place. You bank the fire once more, not to brighten it, only to gather the embers into a lasting core. The lamp on the table is turned a little lower. The logbook is left open. The chair is eased back into place. Each movement is as light as possible, and the cottage absorbs them graciously. Then the key gives one small clear note, as though marking the transition. Upstairs, the room beneath the eaves feels even quieter than before. The blanket is turned down. The pillow is cool on one side, warmer where the lamplight has touched the linen. Through the dormer, the fog presses near the pane in a pale, unbroken field. Yet the lamp still finds it at intervals, and each sweep draws a soft, moving brightness over the ceiling for a few breaths before it passes on. From below rises the softened life of the cottage, a nearly hidden clock, a gentled fire, a far-off spoon settling against cup. Then, thinner still but unmistakable, the brass key sounds from the wall by the door. You lie down without hurry and let the upper room gather around you. The mattress has the quiet resilience of old wool and horsehair well cared for. The blanket keeps a dry warmth that seems to belong as much to the cottage as to any fabric. Above, the roof holds the faint drift of air moving over damp shingles. It is not wind exactly, only the night brushing by. The lamp's turning continues to mark the darkness with regular passing light, and every few cycles the key below offers its tiny, clear companion note. From here, no object needs to be seen directly to remain present. The table downstairs still exists in the mind's gentle map, with the logbook open and the pen laid across the page. The hearth remains a low red cradle of driftwood embers. The rope lies coiled by the door in its place on the floor. The key hangs above it, bright at one edge, dull at the other, and now and then touching the wall with that modest sound. Beyond the cottage are the path, the tower, the revolving lamp, the fog, and below all that, the hushed gray sea. The beauty of the room now is in how little it asks to be followed. Light passes. It fades. A board settles almost too softly to hear. The clock below continues its careful work, but no longer separates moments sharply. Instead, the intervals seem to widen and smooth as though the night were laying broad, quiet cloth over them. Once from outside, there comes the thinnest possible thread of the bellbuoy, distant and rounded by fog. Then nothing but the sea's low presence, and after a while, the key. The keeper's coat hangs in the corner and darkens there. A familiar shape become nearly part of shadow. The shell on the shelf catches one moving line of pale light and then returns it. The books lie closed. The washstand holds its basin in stillness. The whole upper room has the feeling of a watch, completed and left in good order. Downstairs, the lamp on the table burns lower, though its exact change can only be guessed by the gentler glow reaching the stairwell. The key below makes its little note, and the sound seems smaller now, not because it is weaker, but because the house around it has grown so deep. You rest on one side and look toward the dormer. The pane is pearled with moisture again. Each passing sweep from the lighthouse makes the droplets shine and then disappear into ordinary dimness. There is no horizon to hold the eye. The fog has kindly removed distance. What remains is near and sufficient. A window, a beam, a roofline, a room, a bed. Even memory seems to shorten to these few simple things. The night has become local in the best sense, gathered close around one small, secure place above the sea. After some time, the fire below settles further, and the upper room cools by a very gentle degree. The blanket answers by seeming warmer. The lamp in the tower goes on turning with the same patient rhythm, unchanged by fog, unchanged by the hour. Steadiness like that reaches upward through floorboards and stone more surely than sound alone. It is felt in the recurring glow on the ceiling, in the unbroken calm of the house, in the certainty that the key will sound again when the cottage shifts and then rest contentedly in silence afterward. You think of the many nights this little room has known, nights with clearer stars beyond the dormer, nights of rain beating and running faster down the pane, nights when the sea may have spoken more fully below the cliff, or when frost silvered the latch and made the boards firmer underfoot. Yet tonight needs no comparison. It is itself completely, fog-bound, sea-hushed, lamp-swept, driftwood warm, watched over by a key at the door, giving now and then its tiny, exact note. A place becomes beloved by repeated evenings, but any single evening can still be enough. The sounds of the cottage continue to simplify. The clock below becomes less a tick than a soft condition of the air. The fire is almost all ember now, offering only an occasional inward hush. The sea's breathing remains under everything, broad and low. The tower's hum is too far to separate clearly, yet the lamp's revolving brightness proves it is there. And the key, from time to time, keeps sounding in the same clear, brief way, so slight that it never disturbs the quiet, only shapes it. If you listen very closely, there is also the faint, dry whisper of pages downstairs as the room's air shifts around the open logbook. Perhaps one page settles a little flatter. Perhaps the pen rolls half a finger's width and stops. Such sounds are no more than hints, but they belong. In sleepier hearing, the cottage becomes a map made almost entirely of sound. Ember in the grate, clock on the mantel, rope by the door, key on the peg, fog at the window, lamp above the sea. Each keeps its place, and because each keeps its place, the the whole night feels gently ordered. The driftwood fire gives one more soft release from deep within the ash, a red seam opening and then dimming. Downstairs, the table lamp is likely turned low enough now that its shade glows more than the room around it. The chair stands beside it with the throw over the arm. The mug is rinsed and set to dry. The logbook remains open to its fresh line about calm fog and the lamp's faithful turning. These images do not need to be checked. The cottage carries them steadily without any need for watchful thought. Another sweep of the lighthouse beam passes over the fog and brushes the dormer. The ceiling whitens faintly. The shell on the shelf glints once. The room returns to shadow. That cycle continues, patient as breathing. Between these passes, the key below gives its tiny note. The pattern is never exact enough to count, never regular enough to become mechanical to the ear. It remains alive, companionable, and mild. The house does not lull by sameness alone, but by the soft variation of familiar things. Now the buoy sounds again, very far off, so softened by distance and damp that it seems to arrive already half remembered. One low, rounded tone, then a long quiet. It joins the logbook in your mind, where old entries rest beside tonight's fresh page. Bell buoy faint to the south. Yes, the note could be added again if anyone wished. But the room has moved beyond the need to write down every gentle occurrence. Some things can simply pass through the night and leave it rich without record. The upper room darkens a little more as the lamp below is turned lower still, or burns lower of its own accord. The lighthouse beam, by contrast, keeps its measured sweep outside unchanged. This balance between the fading near light and the constant far light gives the cottage a lovely hush. Inside, the house is turning inward. Outside, the tower keeps its broad, steady attention over sea and fog. Between those two, the brass key at the downstairs door continues to hang in its familiar place, offering one small, clear sound whenever the settling wood invites it to speak. It grows easy to imagine the key long after the room itself has gone entirely dark. It would still be there, touched sometimes by the distant beam through the stairwell slit, touched sometimes only by the memory of warmth in the wood beside it. The rope would remain at its foot, the logbook on the table, the embers under their ash, the sea beyond the door. Nothing needs arranging anymore. The cottage has moved into that later quiet where even the simplest object seems to keep a little watch without effort. The fog at the dormer appears almost luminous now, though perhaps this is only because the room has dimmed so much around it. It is a blankness without emptiness. Hidden inside it are the path, the wall, the grass, the rocks, the shore, and the long gray sea. Hidden higher still is the turning lamp itself, known not by sight, but by recurrence. Hidden downstairs is the key, often silent, then suddenly and gently present in one precise touch of brass on wood. Hidden things can be deeply familiar when they return in this way. A final trace of warmth from the fire seems to travel up through the floorboards and then thin. The blanket answers. The pillow has become warm too. The eaves hold their subtle brushing of air. The clock below continues, but recedes farther, as if placed in another house. The key sounds once, clear and fine, and after it, the silence feels wider, like a tide eased over smooth sand. The cottage has entered a slower hour, one that does not need to be named. There is something restful in knowing that the room would be much the same if you opened your eyes now or later or not at all for some time. The same dormer, pearl gray with fog. The same shelf with its shell and books. The same coat on the peg. The same slow passing of the lighthouse beam over the ceiling. The same downstairs table with the open logbook and the pen across the page. The same brass key by the door, waiting for the wood to settle and to give again that tiny, bright note. Continuity itself becomes a kind of soft landscape. The sea remains hushed, folded beyond the rocks in the dark. No wave rises enough to break the calm pattern of sound. It only breathes at the edge of hearing, broad and patient. The buoy does not return for a long while. The lamp continues. The fog receives. Downstairs, perhaps one ember finally gives over, and the grate answers with a nearly inaudible shift. Then the key touches the wall again, clear as a star would be if there were stars visible tonight. The note is so small, and yet it seems to place the whole cottage exactly where it belongs in the fog. You might think of the keeper sleeping on other nights with these same sounds arranged around the bed, hearing without fully waking the lamp's sweep, the sea's hush, the house's settling, the key's tiny mark of movement at the threshold. Such nights must have folded into one another gently over the years, not erased by repetition, but deepened by it. A life shaped by care for one place gives every small sound a known meaning. Even a brass key tapping wood can become part of the home's simplest music. The room asks nothing now except to be part of this music. The walls do not close in. The fog does not hide anything that needs to be found. The lamp does not search. It simply turns. The sea does not call. It simply continues. The key does not summon. It only answers the old wooden cottage as it settles into itself more fully. In this way, the night keeps becoming quieter without ever becoming empty. Each sound leaves a little more room behind it, and that room remains warm. Soon the beam at the dormer seems less bright, perhaps because the eyes have grown used to its passing, perhaps because the fog has thickened once more. The ceiling receives only a muted wash now. The shell scarcely glints. The coat remains a soft, dark shape. The books are nearly shadow alone. Downstairs all is further away. Ember, clock, table lamp, rope, key. Yet the key's note still reaches, very lightly, traveling up the stair and through the floorboards as if the house itself were carrying it carefully from one level to the next. The sound comes once more. Then much later, again. In between there is only the large, gentle fabric of the night. The cottage rests in it like a lantern long after the flame has been shaded. Outside, the headland remains wrapped in fog. Inside, the logbook lies open beneath the dim lamp. By the door, the brass key hangs above the rope, and the boots, bright at one edge, worn smooth where fingers have known it best. Far above, the great light turns over the hidden sea. And, because everything is so settled now, even the smallest sound seems to arrive already softened by belonging. The key's tiny click is no interruption. It is simply the cottage speaking its name in the dark, once, and then no more, for a while. The sea breathes beyond the wall. The lamp sweeps through fog. The embers sleep low. The logbook waits on the table. The rope keeps its coil by the door. The little room under the eaves holds all of this in quiet, and the calm, foggy night goes on, slow and steady, around the lighthouse keeper's small cottage by the sea.